is the Electile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is the Electile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen. Welcome back. I, of course, am Ashton Cohen. I'm joined today by Professor it's Almagor Cohen.
You can't put anything before Cohen.
It's Professor Cohen Almagor, no relation. At least I don't think so. He is a professor of politics at University of Hull. He wrote a fascinating book called Just Reasonable Multiculturalism, which I think is particularly apt in today's world. So, Professor, thanks for being on with me.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. So, I wanted to get to basically your book and the reasons you wrote it and sort of the thesis underlying it. So, give us a sort of overview of your book and the theories and your thesis behind it.
Okay, so first of all, this is the book, Just Reasonable Multiculturalism. And this volume took more than 10 years of my life to write, to think and to ponder and to discuss the issues and to elucidate, at least in my mind, what I want to say. I've been writing articles about multiculturalism and thinking about this for a very long time. So presumably, I think it was 1993 when I started. I was at that time a fellow at the Valley Jerusalem Institute in Jerusalem. And I belonged to something called the European Project that looked at the influence of Europe on the Middle East and the influence of Middle East on Europe. And it was an amazing experience, 3 years of my life that I invested in that. And this brought me to think about multiculturalism for the first time. And I wrote, I don't know, a dozen articles or maybe 20 articles throughout the years, but I did not think about sitting down and writing a book. What actually prompted me to sit down and write the book, to do the research, were statements by David Cameron, who was Prime Minister of Britain at that time. And I'm used to the attacks on multiculturalism that stem from feminism, who claim that multiculturalism is bad for women. And I'm used to attacks from liberalism who claim that multiculturalism is bad for democracy because group rights comes at the expense of individual rights. So these are familiar attacks that there are many, many discussions about it. And I didn't think that I had particularly anything new to say. But David Cameron, I think outrageously, said that multiculturalism no less contribute to terrorism. And as if it was not bad enough, Nicolas Sarkozy and Angela Merkel made speeches around that time and they echoed the same sentiments of David Cameron. And I said, this is really dangerous what these people are doing because, you know, these are high-flying, very powerful people. And with the populism that exists in Europe and the United States and with political extremism on the rise and terrorism and all kinds of racist sentiments and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, this is really, really bad. So I want to understand how come that the Prime Minister of a country can say this. And this is how I started my journey. So I'm looking at answering these three questions, whether multiculturalism indeed is bad for democracy, bad for women, and promoting terrorism. And I decided that I'm going to concentrate only on democracies. So I don't try to cover the entire world. And I'm trying to investigate these three questions and to see whether multiculturalism and liberalism are reconcilable. And I needed some sort of a theoretical framework. I'm a political scientist, so that's how I work. I work with theory and then apply it to case studies. I decided to develop a theory that is going to be comprehensive and will enable me to tackle these questions. And this is when I came out with these ideas that are going to be four components of the theory. The first component is dealing with the issues of justice and liberalism and democracy. And I'm trying to explain what justice is and what democracy is and what liberalism is. And I'm borrowing a lot from a thinker of our time. I mean, he died in 2002. His name is John Rawls, who wrote a very famous book called The Theory of Justice. And I'm a Rawlsian in a sense, so that's one sort of a leg of the theory. Second leg is about multiculturalism, explaining what multiculturalism is and what are the constraints of multiculturalism. And here I'm borrowing from people like Will Kimlicka, the Canadian scholar. And the third concept is the concept of reasonableness. So what is reasonable? And the theory is just and reasonable multiculturalism. And the main thesis is that liberalism, multiculturalism are reconcilable, provided that multiculturalism is just and reasonable. And the two other concepts deal with compromise and coercion. Compromise, it's clear. I mean, when you have different point of view and people want different things, that you try to find some sort of a middle way to bridge between them. And I'm a great believer in bridges rather than in walls. And I follow Habermas, another scholar, deliberate democracy. So if we are going to speak and we are going to debate and we are going to deliberate and we exchange views and so on, we'll be able to find a solution. And then the issue is coercion, because there's another component here, and that's why I call it liberalism, culture, and coercion. We seem to think that coercion is a bad thing. We shrink from coercion. Nobody likes to be coerced. But if you come to think about it for a second, our life is full of coercion. I mean, I don't know many people, I don't know about you, but I testify. I really don't like to pay taxes, especially when they're excessive. Mm-hmm. But we pay taxes and we accept it as part of our life because we understand that are important for us to continue society. We go to do jury duty. Israelis go and serve in the army. They may not really particularly like it, but they do it. They understand. We send our kids to school. There's a mandatory education for kids. We obey laws because we understand that there's a need, otherwise there'll be a chaos. So we accept coercion to an extent when it is justified, when it's reasonable, we accept it. And of course, if we are talking about the extent to which the liberal society should intervene in affairs, illiberal affairs of illiberal cultures within liberal democracy, and these are the questions that I'm dealing with, then of course it's going to involve coercion. We are going to coerce certain subgroups, certain cultures within liberal democracy that want to implement their own culture and say, hey, that's not acceptable, not here anyway. We are not going to allow this. So the tricky question for me is the limit of state interference. Something that, especially Americans, they're really troubled by government power and very suspicious of government. But they would say that sometimes the government should interfere when it comes to minority rights, when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to children's rights, when it comes to health rights, when it comes to certain rights that we all appreciate. And the question is, when should the state interfere and when should the state let go, let off, and let them do whatever they want? So once I developed the theory, this is the first part of the book, then I start the application of the theory. And first I applied what I call the easier cases. And the easier cases are cases of physical harm. Why I'm saying it's easier? Because if I punch you and I'm going to hurt your nose and you start bleeding, it's noticeable, it's tangible. We can see that, we can feel it, we understand you're hurt. But sometimes the harm, you can't see it. It's not that tangible. And this is why it's more complicated. So I have two chapters about physical harm, and then I have two chapters about non-physical harm. The physical harm have to do with cases like murder for family honor. And for me, it's a complete no-no. You can tell me from now until eternity that you think murder for family honor sometimes justified. I would say never justified. I'm talking about scarring. I'm talking about female circumcision. I'm talking about female genital mutilation. And I'm speaking about male circumcision. So I'm taking a certain case study and trying to apply the theory and decide to what extent the state should intervene when we are talking about physical harm, moderate, and of course, more severe. And then there are two chapters about non-physical harm, in which I'm looking on issues like forced marriage, arranged marriages, depriving women of property, depriving women of education, and depriving children of education. And again, I'm looking at to what extent these are justifiable, yes or no. And the last two chapters of the book are country case studies. Because remember, I started this journey because of David Cameron, who said that it promotes terrorism. So I looked at the extent that multiculturalism has been restricted because of security concerns, because it might evoke terrorism. So in France, you may have heard there are constant debates about what women dress. The French are obsessed with women dressing, not so much men dressing, but women dressing really disturb them. Even in the age of COVID, when we cover our faces with masks and so on, they are still deeply obsessed with the issue of the burqa and the niqab and the hijab, and they declare war on them. And they said that this is not acceptable, and it's a case of public order and security. In the name of public order and security, they want to infringe that right of the women to dress as they wish. And the last chapter has to do with Israel and the issue of the Israeli Palestinians. Again, because the Israeli Palestinians are 21% of the population, they are a minority, but some Israelis perceive them as fifth column, as a threat to Israel. And therefore, there's some sort of discrimination against Israeli Arabs or Israeli Palestinians, whatever they want to call them. So I'm looking at these issues and asking myself to what extent this is justified in the name of protecting security. So that's the book.
Okay. You bring up a lot of interesting points that we could tackle into. So with regards to, think about how I want to start this. With regards to the, say, when does multiculturalism, well, actually, let's start here. Do you think multiculturalism has been, particularly from the Islamic world, because that's where a lot of the issues come from, as you mentioned, including in France, that seems to be one of the main points of controversy, and it's a significant political issue as well, and England as well, where you're from, where you live right now. What's successful about multiculturalism, right? So what should multiculturalism's aims be from the government's perspective if they have problems with, say, assimilating people? How far should they go in terms of that?
Well, first of all, you need to appreciate multiculturalism. I think we are going to have a tremendously boring place if all of us, we look exactly the same, if all of us are going to dress exactly the same, if all of us are going to like the same food and the same dishes. Say, if you can imagine that all of us are going to eat all the time only British food. And all of us are going to have only certain festivals and no others. And when you go to the market, you will have only several flavors and not this wonderful mosaic of colors, of smells, of dresses, of, cosmopolitanism, of, many, many cultures that are intervening in and playing a part. I think that we should, at least in liberal democracy, we should embrace pluralism. We should embrace the cultures. I would not like to live in a place where everyone looks exactly the same. So the starting point is that it is something good. You can learn a lot by the others. I think all of us have barriers, and it's very easy for us to connect with people who look like us. And it takes some effort to know the other. And if it looks aligned to you, you start to develop all kinds of fears and suspicions and so on. But once you understand the logic of another culture, then you begin to develop some sort of empathies, and you can see that actually people are very much the same. We appreciate more or less the same thing.
Can I just add something? But should we accept the fact that, let's say you're France or England, obviously understanding that the cultures are significantly different, right? So someone coming in from Spain, immigrants coming in from Spain and then establishing themselves in there is very different than those coming from the Islamic world. For example, I'll just read you a couple stats once you respond to this. So this is Pew Research. 8 in 10 Muslims in Egypt and Pakistan endorse the stoning of people who commit adultery. 70% of Muslims in Jordan and 56% of Nigerian Muslims share the view. In Egypt, Jordan, and Pakistan, 86%, 84%, 76% respectively view that the death penalty should be enforced against Muslims who leave their religion. Majorities as well in various other, in Saudi Arabia as well. So when you have, obviously these are deep ingrained views. This is a part of their culture, passed down many, many generations. They are very connected to their religion. You know, Angela Merkel or David Cameron or their school system may not be able to talk them out of it. So how do you deal with people who have those sorts of views living in your society and still maintain a liberal democracy? At what point do you tolerate too much intolerance?
Okay, that's exactly what this book is all about. I'm trying to delineate the limits of interference. That's exactly what it's about. Mm-hmm. And I limit myself to democracy. So I'm not dealing with places that are authoritarian. Okay, so the issue, according to your question, what should we do with people who come from that kind of culture, say Saudi or Iranian culture, in which stoning might be acceptable, Sharia laws and so on, and they come to the United States or they come to Britain, what should we do about this? Well, this is when I spoke about deliberative democracy and persuasion and compromise and speaking out and debating and all these things. Putting all the machinery of the state in education, in explanation, in media, in all the apparatus of the state that we have in order to make them realize that this is not Saudi Arabia and this is not Iran. Mm-hmm. And we are not going to compromise over issues like respect for others and not harming others. You can't harm people because they've done X. That's unacceptable. So if a woman went out with a man who doesn't belong to her family, immediate family, that's not a cause for stoning in our culture. And if you want to live here, then you have to accept our principles. If you're not going to accept our principles, then you have the wrath of the law, because we don't allow this to happen. So once they come to our society, they have to accept the rules of society. Mm-hmm. And I'm all in favor, as I said, for bridges and explanation and talking, education and so on. But there's no one law for one culture and another law for another culture. Mm-hmm. That's totally unacceptable.
Right.
Where to put the lines? Okay, so this is where the debate starts and so on. So I make a distinction. For instance, in my opinion, I think scarring is acceptable.
I'm sorry, what is that?
Scarring.
Scarring?
Scarring, to scar your body.
Okay.
In some African cultures, they could perceive this as a sign of beauty or heroism. And in some cultures, they scar quite a bit of their body. If you like, it's an earlier method of tattoos. Mm-hmm. Okay. But they do it in different tools, and it goes deeper to your skin. And I would not interfere in scarring if it doesn't cause death. Mm-hmm. I would like this to be in hygienic tools and so on, but I would not interfere with scarring. I make a distinction between female circumcision and female genital mutilation. And this is interesting because there used to be, I'm not sure to what extent it exists today, but in the Negev, in the south of Israel, there are Bedouins. And for many years, they applied to women a small scar on the outer labia. And this is not worse, in my opinion, than male circumcision. And this was done for ritual purposes of group maintain the community, maintaining the tribe, and so on. And I would accept that, as I accept male circumcision, because I think there's not much difference.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I'm vehemently against
Right.
female genital mutilation
That's right.
when they, you know, just destroy womanhood. They just
Mhm.
destroy the women's body. They deprive her of her sexuality,
Mhm.
and she would suffer forever.
Right.
From the time that it's been
Right.
conducted
And that's an
until the
important
time she
distinction.
died, she would suffer because every time she urinates, every time she will have sexual affairs, she's going to suffer. It's very,
Mhm.
very painful. This is totally unacceptable.
Mhm.
And of course, I'm very much against murder for family honor, as I said before.
Right.
So delineating these lines are problematic. And I hope that I bring a rationale how to delineate these lines. And also when it comes to non-physical harm, as I said, depriving education or depriving property from women.
That's what about, so that's from the legal perspective. So let's get a little bit deeper on some of the thorny cultural issues with, so France, they're very proud of their secular society, right? And it began obviously before the heavy amounts of Muslim immigration in their society, right? They're very, liberty oriented, and they have a sort of, yeah, I would say sort of civil libertarian culture as well in terms of sexuality and all that. They're more of the almost classic sexual liberation style country in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
So France, this is their culture, and they're even have a very distinct separation between church and state, even with regard to Christianity, have done for a long time. Now, France says, okay, so they accepted all these Muslim refugees into their country, and now they have in certain communities women walking around with full niqabs, like it's like you would see in Saudi Arabia or something of that nature. And their position would be, and I think it's reasonable, that, all right, maybe there's a couple true believers in this, but how many women actually, and it's always funny when you see the juxtaposition of them next to their male guardian or their husband or whatever, who's wearing like a tank top and shorts. How many women will actually have the free will to want to drape themselves in basically a curtain in, even when it's hot outside, and wearing a full black veil? How much of that is cultural oppression, is oppression put in by their male guardians and the culture around them, making certain communities look like they're Saudi Arabia? And how much is that, oh no, she actually, she's thought about the issues and she freely chooses this? And France says, or members of French politics and people, certain percentage of people in French society, probably the majority, say, hey, like, if you want to be like that, then there's go back to your home country in a sense, because we don't like this extreme. People talk about paternalism. This is paternalism to the extreme, and we don't actually think that this is something that the vast majority of time is something free will. This is a form of cultural oppression, and we don't want it in public places. Now, obviously, in the United States, you couldn't do that because, and we have certain constitutional rights surrounding that. And I am an American, and I do support the constitutional rights with regards to that for sure. I can understand to a certain extent, though, if I were a Frenchman, if I was raised in that sort of ideology and based on their system, why they would be so against that. How do you respond to that point of view?
Well, I explain from where this evolved, this kind of notions of separating state and religion and wanting to maintain in the public sphere totally secular. And I explained the background from the French Revolution going forward, and then the colonialism of France, the mass Muslim coming was not refugees. They came because of the Algiers War and the French colonialism of North Africa, Algerians and Moroccans and Tunisian, but especially Algerians. And this is where they started to come in high numbers because of French colonialism, not because of refugees. And they opened the gates to people from Algeria, and they come. And nobody knows the exact numbers because, as I said, they don't believe that people should divulge their information about their religion. So they don't have any census about what the religion is, but they only estimate. And the estimates vary from 5 million to, say, 9 million Muslims in France. How many of them actually wear the burqa? The burqa is the full dress that leaves the woman only with a mesh on the eyes that you can see through a mesh. That's the burqa. That's the most excessive and elaborate form of dressing. The estimates are about 1,500 women in France. It's not a huge number. 1,500 women, it's not a huge number. Was there anybody did any kind of survey asking these women why they're wearing the burqa? I'm not aware of it. But it is worth a try. There are not too many women, so it would be quite not going to be very costly sort of enterprise to track down these women and ask them to what extent they're going to answer and to what extent they're going to answer candidly. Your speculation is as good as mine. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that we as humans, we have a problem when someone doesn't cover, when someone covers his or her face. We have an issue with that. Because now you look at me through the Zoom and you look the way that I express myself, you look at not only my hands, but you look my face, my eyes, the facial movement. It gives you a sign. Now you are smiling at me, you give me a hint. You can be disinterested or you can be engaged. You can fall asleep or you can be joyful. I'm taking hints from the way that you provide to me expression in your face. And we appreciate that. We don't like it when the face is covered. In the book, I'm giving an example of someone who enters a bus. And actually the example was written way before COVID. I didn't have any imagination of COVID before that. And the example is the following: someone enters a bus, and there are three scenarios. He finds himself in a bus that is full of people who cover themselves with ecological masks, like what used to be Japan, before COVID and now, or China, whatever. And he asks himself, where am I? And he suddenly realized there's a group of tourists, that's in London. So a group of tourists coming from the Orient, and that's how they dress. They put the masks on. Second scenario, he comes into a bus and all of the people there are all putting the helmets on, motorcycle helmets. And he doesn't understand what's going on. And there's only one guy who doesn't wear this helmet on. And they all, he and the guy who doesn't wear the helmet understand what's going on when all those who wear helmets suddenly shout, surprise! And it was a birthday party for this guy that you infiltrate by mistake. So there's a reason why they all wearing helmets. And the third one is that they're all wearing the niqab. Just the eyes are shown, but that's it. And the explanation for this is that he entered the bus and it occupied by many Muslim women. The tourists came from, Saudi Arabia, and he enters the bus. And then I'm asking my reader, okay, stop now and think for yourself, is there any difference between the three scenarios? And whether one scenario is more disturbing to you than another. And try to answer this candidly. Because in the three scenarios, you don't see the faces in all of them. Now, are you disturbed by one scenario more than another? If the answer is that you're disturbed for one scenario than another, then you have to ask yourself why. In any event, this is your problem. It is not the women's problem. The women can dress as they wish. And indeed, in the most liberal democracies in the world, women do dress as they wish. The hypocrisy of this thing in France is that if you look at the burkini, which is the swimsuit of Muslim women, and you compare it to, say, nuns' dress when they go to the beach, or even you compare it to diver suits, you don't see much differences between the three.
Yeah,
but they pick up on the Muslims, and then the question begs why they pick up on the Muslims. What is disturbing them in the Muslim? So is it the dress, or it's something that is more sinister, deeper than just the dress?
Mm-hmm.
I found the preoccupation with the women's dress in France bizarre. I have to tell you that, and I'm at least equally disturbed by the little black dress in cold winters, if they speak about health hazards and whatever, or the steel toe, high heels. I find it far more disturbing and health hazard than the burqa or the niqab. So all these things that, we care about the women. Well, if you really care about the women, why don't you listen to them? Just listen to them. Speak to them. Why they're wearing this. And then when you speak to them, you find that actually this dress provides them with security. Because of this dress, sometimes are able to go out of the house because the men trust them that nothing is going to happen. And because for many of them, it's a sign of piety, of modesty. It provides them with a secure space in which they can walk, and they feel protected from the gaze of men. So you have to listen to the argumentation of these women, and then you put it in perspective and ask how reasonable it is to demand them to wear like you, and to walk like you, and to be like you. I mean, why is that? Why is there such intolerance? So I think that the answer has to come from the researcher. And I hint and say what I think that it is. But of course, there are many answers why the French believe what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
But there are, obvious answers and there are less obvious answers.
I think make a couple of good points there. With France, obviously, as you mentioned, a good portion of the immigrants or the immigrant communities who live there were from the colonial era. I'm assuming there must have been, especially in 2015. I'm not sure what percentage went to France, but in 2015, with the whole refugee crisis, a new wave of immigration coming into Europe, I'm assuming some of them went there. I know Germany took in like 1 million. Sweden took in a significant percentage as well. With respect to the burkini, I think that's just that's just stupid. The obsession with that, but and with your assessment of the burqa, so you said only 1,500 people. I don't doubt that. It would be interesting because I was in France about 5 years ago, and it's possible a significant portion of people were tourists, but I saw a lot of those. Right, I do, and I've seen it in various European cities. Much more so than any American city, which has done a much better job of assimilating everyone, including, Muslim Americans are very well assimilated. Much better job, I think, that America's done relative to Europe. I guess one of the things I have issue with is, and I'm still trying to figure out myself, is let's say you are one of these European countries, France or Germany or Sweden or one of the Scandinavian countries, and your ethos as a society, as a culture, is, as we said, not only secular but egalitarian with respect to men and women, has exceptional derision for cultural paternalism, particularly on the extreme paternalism side. And obviously, in these Scandinavian countries, for example, right, kids are indoctrinated. And I don't necessarily mean that in a pejorative way, but they're indoctrinated from a very early age. I think Scandinavia probably does this more so than any other European country, although the others do as well, of pushing this egalitarian idea between between the sexes and freedom and toleration and do whatever you want, whether you're a man or woman. And their point of view is that we are so antagonistic towards this idea of women being pressured to dress this way. We don't even, if you want to come to this country, there are limits in terms of how many people that we're going to accept who have this mindset and bring that sort of medieval views on how women should dress. It's not only it's more than just because they're Muslim, right? It's just we are so that's so antithetical towards what we stand for as a country that we just don't want to tolerate it. And that's one of the things I sort of wrestle with, because I understand that. I mean, imagine if you had certain communities where tens of thousands of people dress like that, particularly women. You could see why they wouldn't want to be amenable towards tolerating that. Or is what's your response to that?
Ashton, what is tolerance? Tolerance is not something that you embrace that because you agree with that. Tolerance is something that you accept, that is different, that you don't like it, and still you think that should be tolerated. This is tolerance. That you have the power to care about certain phenomena that you dislike. That's tolerance. It's very easy to tolerate things that look like you. That's not tolerance. That's something that comes very easy. To tolerate something is always to tolerate something you don't like, so it comes with a price. I don't ask you to like it. I mean, the issue of liking never occurred in my vocabulary. I never said that I like or dislike the book. I just say it's none of my business. It doesn't harm me. It doesn't do any effect on me. If a woman wants to dress like this, so she can dress as she likes. Why should I interfere? Why it is my business to tell a woman how to dress? I can think should interfere if they want to kill this woman because she goes out with a man. Mm-hmm. This is going to disturb me a great deal. Or if they want to mutilate her body, or if they want to infringe her education, I would come and protect her and defend her. But if she wants to dress as she wills, I mean,
what if it's not her choice? What if it's right? So it's very hard to pull people and get honest opinions of people who live in a culture surrounding them of not only everybody that they interact with on a day-to-day basis and their family, that pressure them to live in this very, very extreme religious kind of way, right? So how do you, that's my point. How do you, and this goes back to your point in terms of when to compromise and when to coerce. And, for example, I remember reading a poll by, Channel 4 and channel for Americans out there. Channel 4 is, I guess, kind of like the NBC of England. It's a major channel. And, they found that 2/3 of British Muslims wouldn't report to the police if they knew someone was working for ISIS, right? So you have all these sort of thorny issues and a large problem with it. What's largely responsible for it is the fact that Europe has failed in assimilation in a lot of ways and created these parallel societies. So, and just stepping beyond just the dressing issue, usually when someone takes that, first of all, when they wear the full burqa, that's not even, that's not even, mandated by the Quran, right? So we're talking about very extremely religious people, because, again, the Quran doesn't even mandate that you have to wear that. And that's their reintegration of that is more of a recent phenomenon, right? Of like maybe within 100 years or so, where that's been demanded more. There was a point where, and still in Muslim countries and communities, where, you know, a headscarf would be sufficient, but some places go even further than that, right? So what I'm trying to get at is that there are all sorts of there are things that come with that mindset as well that becomes difficult to deal with. It's not only, of course, you want to step in, and here's where we agree. I agree with most of what you said, but particularly, of course, we have to agree with any reasonable person will agree when there's actual harm being done to another person, honor killing, a genital mutilation, for being forced into something. Of course. What about some of these other issues in terms of like the mindset that comes with that, right? The view on women, the, you know, belief that homosexuals should be killed, all that kind of stuff. Like how does a society deal with that? Other than, what are the public policy solutions to deal with that? And what are the cultural solutions to actually properly assimilate people? Like, yeah, of course, you know, be a Muslim, go to a mosque, pray 5 times a day. It's wonderful. You know, there are a lot of wonderful things that come with being a religious person who is also, you know, grounded in what our expectations of what modernity and constitutional rights entail. Of course, it's lovely. But at what point, yeah. Well, what point do we make?
So these are where the concepts of justice and reasonableness are coming in. That tries to make people understand what is just and what is reasonable. And there is a discourse about this. And of course, my opinion about this might be different from another person's opinion, but I'm trying to be consistent in my claims and saying that, you know, these things are just and others are not just. And for me, the 2 major yardsticks that underpin everything are respect for others and not harming others. So if I think that certain actions, certain cultural actions or conduct is disrespectful to someone, to minority, to women, to children, and is harming these people, and then we have to work up what is harm and what is tolerable harm and what is not tolerable harm. Then the state will interfere. Again, it's a judgment call that I'm doing here, and it might be the case that other people are going to say, don't allow male circumcision because this is harmful. And believe you me, that the most complicated chapter that I wrote in this book was about male circumcision. That for me was the most complicated chapter. Because as a Jew, like the vast majority of Jews, I'm circumcised and my children are circumcised. And it comes with pang of consciousness. When I had to circumcise my children, it was not an easy decision for me. And it was not an easy thing to witness. You know, it's your child, you want the welfare of the child. It's very, very important to you. But again, what you need is to strike a balance between the culture that underpin you and underpin a certain group and human rights, or in this case, children's rights. And you want to protect both. You want to have an interplay that you respect culture and at the same time, you're not invoking torture. And what I tried in the book is to find a middle way that is going to accommodate both multiculturalism and liberalism.
Right.
And to find the middle way that will allow the practice to continue, but in a way that is not going to be torturous. To find that kind of a solution, it took me a long, long time and deep into the research. I now know about male circumcision far more than I wanted to know when I started the book. I'll tell you that. But this was something that was a journey for me to try to establish. And of course, the fact that I'm Jewish plays a part here. So we all byproducts of, you know, our religion, our culture, the home in which we grew up, our family, our friends, and so on. And we try to accommodate this into this metaphysic ideas that we play with, and we try to find the solution.
Let me ask you in a different way. Because I want to get down to what your theories are in terms of solving the problems with multiculturalism, because they are significant, they are immense in some of these European countries, many of them. So where has places like I know you study France in particular, but you're in England, where have they failed? Why have they failed in properly assimilating Islamic communities? Obviously, there are many Muslims who are assimilated, but there are many who aren't, right? There are many who don't actually see themselves as a part of the wider culture, who don't actually abide by internally, whether they do it, whether they actually break the law or not, but who don't actually see legitimacy in the rules of their society, the secular nature of their society, the constitutional rights. They don't, in England, they don't have a written constitution, but the legislative rights of these countries, they don't see themselves as a part of that wider culture and as a part of that creed, and they don't particularly view it with any reverence. Like, why has that failed? Why have they failed to assimilate many people into their wider culture, and what can be done about that?
Invest in resources, invest in education, invest in meeting points. It's all boils down to resources at the end of the day. Why Black people in the United States feel alienated from the system? Why they are not fully integrated into American society? In any place where you see that there are minorities that are disenfranchised, that are not equal, you have to ask what efforts have been made by the establishment to accommodate them, and how much was invested in education, and what meeting points were existing to come together between the majority and the minority, and what was done in order to make the minority majority, if at all. All these things, it all boils down to resources. You invest, you get your earnings. You don't invest, you are going to continue with the poverty, you're going to continue with discrimination, you're going to continue with racism, you're going to continue with divisions in society, and you are not going to get into integration.
So are you,
that's what you need to do. And that's the same story all over again, each and every country, when you see a minority that is not on the same level as the majority.
Okay, but do you see, so with regards to African Americans in the United States, I would say that's completely different, because African Americans still believe, on the vast majority, even if they have issues with certain aspects of how things work, the judicial system or whatever, the vast majority still believe in the basic principles. If you were to pull them principle by principle, freedom of speech, how we run an election, search and seizure laws, freedom of religion, those sorts of things, basic foundational structural issues. There's a considerable amount of agreement across the races. There's just no doubt in that. African American participation in elections, for example, are the highest they've ever been. But it's not the case with respect to a lot of the immigrant communities in Europe, particularly the Islamic ones.
Which one?
Right.
No,
for example, like what I quoted in terms of the Muslims in England, for example, right, where 2/3 wouldn't alert the police if someone they knew was an ISIS. Like that's a significant portion.
I would question the source that you are just quoting now.
The Channel 4. Yeah.
Channel 4.
The Channel 4 did a poll on it, but it's not just them. I mean, there are several.
I find it hard to believe. Listen, if it was that dramatic, as you say, 2/3 are going to support ISIS or discreetly support ISIS.
Not support ISIS, but wouldn't tell the police if someone that they knew was engaged in it.
Tell the police? Because they're afraid to tell the police?
Well, that's my point. So that's
they're afraid of
right.
ISIS.
Right. That's my point, is in regards to whether it's, if you have questions about poll and that, that's fine, but there's no question we're talking about double-digit percentages. It could maybe be 10%, but it's probably more than that, who don't agree with the foundational basic rights, who don't believe with the central ethos of what their country stands for, right? And there's been polls on, I don't have the polls with me on this one, but I've seen it before where, you have a sizable percentage of the population don't even consider themselves British, right? Who don't identify with that, right? So
I don't know. Again, I don't know whether you're taking your sources and why do you think that your ideas are credible? Like, I would dispute all of them. I think the majority of Muslims in each and every country, European country, are law-abiding citizens. There's a small minority.
Well, no, we're not talking about actual external acts where they're committing a crime. We're talking about their actual belief system and what they sympathize with and what they believe. And they've done many polls on this. We can pull them all day long.
I hear many Muslims in Britain who support exactly what I support.
Yeah, but many isn't okay. So like where we're talking about 90%, 80%, even if it's say 70 or 80%, it's still 20%. It's a lot of people, right?
I did not do any research about this. So I can't answer that.
Okay.
I simply do not know. It's not part of what I didn't study political extremism in Muslim society in Britain. That was not the core of the issue.
Mm-hmm.
The core of the issues, as explained, was to answer the question whether liberalism is reconcilable with multiculturalism. And to that I answer it is reconcilable. That was the main issue that troubled me, and whether multiculturalism is bad for democracy, bad for women, and promote terrorism. These are the questions that I try to answer. So that was not the core of the question that you asked me now. So my simple answer, I don't know, but I would dispute any kind of figure that is going to portray the Muslims as something else that is not part of the British society, the French society, the Dutch society, or the Swedish society. I would dispute this. Because if that was the case, Europe was in a severe problem, and we'll have acts of terrorism every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Luckily for us, that's not the case. And the vast majority of the cases, the Muslims are going to say we are against any form of terrorism.
I would say the majority for sure. I do agree with that. The majority.
The vast majority. Luckily for us, it's only a small percentage of people who actively support ISIS. I don't know what they speak at home. I have no idea. But you also don't know what they speak at home.
Well, I mean, they do have polls on this, and you can extrapolate based on their views on whether they think homosexuals could be executed, for example, right?
When it comes to polls is one of my specialty. So when polls, I would like to know who did the poll, for what purposes, how it was conducted, how they assembled the data, how they analyzed the data. Mm-hmm. All these issues are very crucial for me, because polls can be done in all kinds of ways. You can do a credible poll and you can do a crappy poll. And unfortunately, there are too many crappy polls that are based on certain agendas. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a party of that. I don't have an agenda. I don't want to.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I'm guided by the truth. I'll find the truth. I'll try to accommodate myself. And believe me, during this journey, as I said, I had to change my views on several issues. It's not it was not simple. It's not that I said, I'm going to decide this before I started the journey. I was very much against female circumcision when I started this journey. For instance, I was very much against female circumcision. I didn't know what my views about the Amish and the infringement of education when I started the journey. I didn't know that male circumcision is such a complicated issue when I started this journey. And once upon a time, I wrote an article in which I said that the Supreme Court of the United States, when he approved the Indian infringement of women, was just. And now I think it was not just. So I changed my mind about this issue as well. So, people do change their minds, and people have to be confronted with data. But the data you have to research very, very credibly and very thoroughly before you make up your mind.
Okay. I just want a quick thing on that, because I wanted to get to the core of the assimilation issue, which is what you talked about. Because, so, for example, if you dispute the polls, have you seen any polls anywhere? We could stick with homosexuality because that's usually one of the markers of being tolerant in general, right? So have you seen any polls anywhere, let's say of England or France, where the majority of Muslims don't believe that homosexuality should be a jail offense? Because the vast majority of polls show that they do.
It's not part of my research, so I can't answer.
But that goes towards the assimilation issue, right?
I believe
that's why I brought it up, because in terms of the assimilation issue,
I believe that many people of different religions, when they come to extreme views and when they are very, very conservative, they will be anti-gay. They will be anti-homosexuality. In this country, in Britain, up until the 60s, homosexuality was an offense, criminal offense.
Right.
So homosexuality went a long way for us to persuade us that they are equal and they deserve equality and egalitarianism. Right. And you'll still find in this country people who belong to churches, Christian churches, Muslim churches, Jewish churches, who are going to tell you that homosexuality is abominable and should be barred, should be criminalized, and people should sit in jail. And you find,
but not the majorities. You won't find the majority of Christians or Jews think it should be a jailable offense. It's just not a fact.
You'll find Jews and Christians that are going to tell you that homosexuality is against God.
Yeah, but that's not a jailable offense. That's a significant difference. That's a public policy position.
And these people should pay the price. And how they're going to pay the price, whether in this world or in the other world, that's a major concern for them, whatever. But for me, the starting point is that simply don't accept it. I believe in live and let live. They don't do any harm to others.
Of course.
Why should we go after them? So it's not a matter that is constrained only to Islam. It is something that is ingrained in very deep-seated conservative views of all religions, of all cultures. It's not just tagging Islam that they believe in that. Any extreme religion believe in that.
Right, but there's a difference between believing that it's wrong and then believing and supporting a guy coming to your house with a gun to put you in jail for doing something that they believe is wrong, right? So that's what I'm getting to in terms of the assimilation aspects. Like, how do you assimilate people that and Europe has failed to do it so far, to stop these sorts of parallel societies in a sense? Like, what is it? Just a question of not education? Has Europe failed in educating? Is that your thesis? It's not enough money has been spent on education, and that's why we have failed to make inroads with immigrant communities.
Not only education, everything, infrastructure, life, housing, being part of the market, not to be the last to enter and the first to leave. Lack of discrimination, equality, all these things, they are the bridges for egalitarianism in society. And this is going to gain your respect. Otherwise, they'll be alienated from you. And I said it's something that we all have to invest more. Mm-hmm. We the majority, I'm not speaking the majority as if I'm in the majority. I'm a Jew in Britain, I'm not a majority. But the majority, those people who believe that they are the majority, those in the establishment, they have to be the kind people because they have it.
Right.
They can afford it. They should give it to the others. And then if they invest, they're going to yield results. Positivity yields positivity.
Yeah.
But if you give them nothing, then of course there's going to be hostility. And they would continue to believe in whatever they come from, that they continue to believe. But if you don't want them to be fully integrated, invest in their full integration. That's what I'm saying. Not only education, everything, all aspects of society. That's the issue that I have with the Israeli Palestinians. That is a lack of investment in them. If there will be more investment in them, then there's no fears of fifth column. They will be fully integrated into society.
Yeah, and I think it's a legitimate point of view. First of all, being kind to everybody, no matter what their religion or background is, of course. And of course, there are wonderful people of all cultures and all religions. This goes without saying. I think any reasonable person has to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
There are, I obviously my mother's side of the family come from a Muslim country and have lived there probably for about 1,000 years or so. And there was a reason why people who were Jewish lived in certain parts of the Muslim world, was because at one point in history, Muslims were much more tolerant towards Jews than Christians were, and that's a fact as well.
Thousands of years. Yeah.
It's nothing inherent. So I do agree. There's nothing inherent that can't be inherent in Islam or any other culture that can't be modernized, that where the majority of the people can still obviously maintain their Christianity, their faith in Christianity, maintain their faith in Judaism, maintain their faith in Islam, but still also respect constitutional rights and the rights, the natural rights that we have deemed are natural. Of course, I'll never argue that. The question is, how do we get, because I'll just give you a quick anecdote and then we can move on from this. But my mother's from Iran, right? So when she was living there when she was born there in the 60s, Iran was becoming a very westernized society. From that point onwards, the radical interpretations of Islam became manifest in much of the Muslim world. And that's been the problem that we've been dealing with, right? Is the radical interpretations of it. And after, of course, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, Saudi Arabia turned it up to level 10 because their leaders didn't want to get overthrown. They didn't want to see what happened to the Shah. That brand of medieval radical Islam became the dominant ideology in many communities. And so the question is, in terms of assimilation, if we just, and I think this is your point, and it's a reasonable point, which is, if we just invested more in the communities in Europe who are of the Islamic persuasion, in all the resources that you mentioned, would they then change their views on some of these fundamental issues that the rest of us en masse, majority of us have agreed are central to what it means to be British, to be French, to be a Westerner, right? And your position, and correct me if I'm wrong, is yes, if we invest the full amount of resources, then that will start to change as well. They'll be more like everyone else, for example.
It's worth a try.
Okay.
Never done, so let's try.
Thank you so much for being with me. Really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you, Ashton. Good to see you.
If you enjoyed our show, please click subscribe to stay up to date with our YouTube channel and podcast, and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts so that we can keep delivering guys some great content. Thanks again, and we will be back next week.
Oh, man.
And probably sex robots.
We stand for a free and open debate and exchange of ideas.
And if you disagree with anything we talk about, you are a racist and no better than Hitler.
What?
Let's get started.